Okay, everyone. Cynthia Erivo, Wicked Star, Miss Elphaba, also Celie from The Color Purple, also Harriet Tubman, also Aretha Franklin, has written a book. One of the most iconic musical theater actresses in the modern age has written a book. And if you can't tell from that intro, I'm excited about this. I like Cynthia Erivo. And the funny thing is that I'm not even a musical theater person. Musicals are not one of my main interests at all, but there's just something about her that I really, really like. And I mean, of course, she's insanely talented and so successful. There's just a lot about her that I love. And she wrote a book, and I read it. And now I'm reviewing it. So let's talk about this. It is called Simply More, a book for anyone who has been told they're too much, I believe is the full title. She published the book days before Wicked for Good hit theaters. And I think I do understand that from a marketing standpoint because, I mean, you're getting so much extra publicity because of the movie, so then the book also gets extra publicity, but then also I feel like the book kind of fades underneath the craze about the Wicked movie, so I feel like people aren't really paying attention to the book because everyone's paying attention to the movie, which I haven't seen yet. I ended up feeling kind of torn about this book because, I mean, I think you can tell just from the way that I'm talking about Cynthia Erivo that I think she has an incredible story to tell, that I think she's so interesting of a person. And I think that that aspect of the way that I view her and her story made me really like this book. But there were parts of it that I also didn't love just in terms of the way it was written. I ended up giving it 2.5 out of 5 stars. So right there, straight in the middle. That is usually what I give a book when I can't really decide. There's half of it that was really strong and half of it that was weak. It's a short book. It's only about 200 pages, and it's half memoir, half self-help book. It's about what the title says. It's about being told or considered to be too much and feeling like maybe you're being subdued or restricted by the world that's not accepting of your personality, your identity, your goals. It's about all of that. That's what it's aiming to explore through Cynthia Erivo's personal experiences, because she has an extremely crazy life. I mean, she went from being a child in a low-income household with a single mother. She's Black, she's queer, she's a woman, has faced a lot of adversity, to being absolutely so successful. She's truly built herself from the ground up. Truly. One of the few circumstances in which there is no Nepo baby situation. She is the person to write this book, because, I mean, her whole career now that has brought her to where she is performing. It's being herself. It's being outspoken. It's being out there and not being afraid to explore and to be simply more. The general thesis of the book is that you're not too much, you're simply more. The book is deeply personal. She uses her own life and her own experiences to talk about really the lessons that she's learned and to sort of inspire the reader and encourage the reader, which is great. And so her life stories are very memoir, right? But then she does this other thing that is giving more self-help by directly talking to the reader. She sort of breaks the fourth wall, if you will. And she talks to the reader and she asks them questions. She asks the reader questions, or she tells the reader to imagine something, or she gives the reader advice on what to do in any, a given circumstance or with a certain situation or feeling. It's very, very direct. And it reads sort of like self-help book-ish, telling the reader, this is what I recommend. This is what you should think about. This is an exercise you should do, lay down, close your eyes and think about blah, blah, blah. She kind of does those sort of things, typically towards the end of every chapter. I have complicated feelings about that aspect of it, and we will definitely get into that. There is definitely a clear narrative in this book. What was really cool is she kind of breaks it up into these 3 main sections, which is the 10-10-10 rule of running a marathon. I've never run a marathon, so I learned a little bit about that today. So the first 10 miles of the marathon is running with your head. The second 10 miles is running with your legs, and the third 10 miles is running with your heart. 30 miles is crazy, by the way. I don't think I could run a marathon. That's kind of how she does it. That's kind of how she describes it. And so we get different anecdotes and different lessons based on those different sections. So the anecdotes, the life stories are so well written. They're beautiful. The narrative is gorgeous. And I mean, like I said at the start, She does have such a valuable story to tell, and she has so many incredible, thought-provoking situations that she's been in, really difficult situations that she's been in, really empowering situations that she's been in, and there were parts of it that were very emotionally vulnerable. It really felt like she was letting the reader in. One thing that I've talked about when I've reviewed memoirs in the past that I really like is when the author is able to really bring you back into their past selves' mind. Like, you know, when you can feel the youth, you can feel that this is a child or young adult perspective, and you can feel it mature, and it feels very authentic. It adds to the immersion, it adds to the emotion, the emotional connection and vulnerability, to feel like you're really inside of this youth, this young, vulnerable spot in their lives that they've grown past, but they're letting you into it and they're letting you see it. She does it. She does a great job. I'm not going to tell you too much of the specifics that she writes about in case you want to read it. I'm not trying to like tell you literally everything about the book, but she talks about she was sort of abandoned by her father. She spent time being chastised by adults for being herself. She was struggling to find her path. She didn't feel confident in acting and music. You know, she wasn't being given the same opportunities as other people as a Black woman, about her struggle coming out as queer, and just other fears and failures and accomplishments and all of the different things that have happened in her life. And there's a lot of them because her life is crazy. And everything just felt very touching and very honest. Like I said, honest. Like it's authentic. It feels truthful. Her writing style is pretty simplistic, but I think a lot of times for a memoir that can really work. I really liked it. I loved hearing the stories about her life. She doesn't spend the whole time being like, I'm a victim, by the way. You know, she talks about all of the people who have been really, really great to her and supportive of her and helpful to her. And she's very empathetic to people. And I think she knows this balance between when she has been mistreated and when empathy is due, and when she needs to reflect on herself and when she made mistakes. That's another great part. The flaw of this book that brought it down to a 50% rating for me was that I think the self-help and memoir style choices kind of contradicted each other a little bit. And I don't think they really helped each other. So this flow of just gorgeously written narrative that I was just talking about was consistently cut off by Erivo telling you like what to think about, what to do, giving very direct advice and asking very direct questions. And basically, she hands what she wants the reader to take away on a platter. She says, this is my story. This is what I want you to think about now that you have read my story. It kind of feels like she doesn't trust either the reader to find the messages she's trying to send, or she doesn't trust the writing to send the messages to a reader. It's unnecessary. She doesn't need to force the message. She doesn't need to force the ideas and the questions that she's trying to ask, because the stories and anecdotes and narrative, it's all completely capable of bringing those things forth on their own. It kind of took me out of it. And it made me feel like the book was less sure of itself, less deeply immersive into her life. I'm not gonna lie, there were a few points where it kind of felt like reading a textbook, you know, like you'd read the chapter, and then at the end it felt like there were like discussion questions, or like some of the advice felt like tasks or like assignments. It just didn't need that. It just did not need it. And I wish that the book had been longer, and that instead of like the questions and advice and stuff, we just gotten more reflection, more details of the stories, more thoughts about how those situations made her feel. Because in nonfiction writing, you can really do a lot with just explaining your feelings. You're not telling the reader how to feel. You're just telling the truth of how you felt. And that can be very impactful. Or telling the way that other people felt can be very impactful. You don't have to do any of telling the reader what to think. You just have to try to convey the messages, the thinking that you had, the emotions that you had in a way that gets through to the reader. And it can be done. It is kind of done in this book, and it could have been done even more. What I think is that she gives very little room for the reader to explore the way that her stories make them feel on an individual level. And she sort of limits the power and impact of her stories in terms of shaping a philosophy by giving pieces of that, and then finishing it off for us very concisely and very abruptly. That's the word I'm looking for. It's very abrupt. So that's where this book really sort of fell off for me. And if you want some examples, there were a few points where she asked you to imagine something or picture something, like close your eyes and picture da-da-da-da. Or there was one where she said, before you go to bed at night, lay down, close your eyes and think about blah, blah, blah. And she asks a lot of questions like, who were people in your life who did X, Y, and Z? What were times in your life where you felt like X, Y, and Z? I don't think that those are necessarily necessary, because when people are reading your book, I mean, I do think that they're going into it with the intention of reflecting on your story. Naturally, people will think about and apply the things that you brought up to themselves. And disclaimer here, it is not that I think that a memoir or a personal story or nonfiction book should never address the reader directly. I don't think that they should never do it. And I don't think that asking questions or giving advice is necessarily bad. And I don't disagree with any of the things that Erivo brings up in the book. I don't think she gives bad advice or asks bad questions. I don't want it to come across like that. I just think that in a way it can be so much more impactful to let your story do the speaking. And I think you have to be very, very intentional about the way and the moments that you do choose to address the reader. And I just think in this book it was so repetitive and for the most part unnecessary. It just made me sad because I admire Erivo so much, and there were so many parts of the book that were just wonderful and so interesting, and I just wish that there could have been more of that. And I would love to see more writing from Erivo, maybe an extended, like longer, like actual memoir or essays. And there was even, there were a couple chapters here and there that had a little bit of poetry to them, like very short chapters with like interesting line breaks that kind of read as poetry. I'm sure she could write beautiful poetry.
Also, just so you know, she did just release an album. I have not listened to it yet, but I feel like I should point that out because that might actually have some of the like poetry stuff that I'm imagining on there. So I'm going to have to listen to that, and I wanted you to know that it exists.
And I'm sure she could write some very cool, like personal, like nonfiction essays. I think that could be really cool. I think she has an incredible life for telling creative nonfiction stories. It was good. There was more to be desired. There were pieces that could be removed. There were things that could be added. And I think 200 pages is so short. I read it on my Kindle, but recently I saw a copy in the store and I picked it up, and just like seeing visibly like how thin it was like, oh, there could just be so much more. I mean, I would love to see more from her, more writing. And I hope that this isn't the last thing she does in terms of literature or publishing writing. I think it would be great. So yeah. Let me know what you thought, if you read it or if you want to read it, or anything that you might have to say. I'm open to it. If you disagree with me, hey, why? I want to know. So yes, thank you very, very much for watching. I also will likely be talking a little bit more about this on TikTok. It's just Liv Catherine 10, like the letter 07, 107. Love you all. Thank you so much for watching this little review of Simply More by Cynthia Erivo. I just did the Defying Gravity like riff thing that she does at the end, and I'm not including it. It was really bad. Bye.